We are live.
Okay. Oyez, oyez, oyez. I will call to order the Sierra Madre Planning Commission meeting of June 6th. Can we have roll call?
Chair Hutt,
Here.
Vice Chair Dennison, Commissioners Catalano,
Here.
Desai,
Here.
Pevsner, and Spears.
Present.
Okay, let's move on to approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Now we'll move on to approval of minutes of the May 16th meeting. Do we have any corrections or comments?
That was good.
Good.
None here.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take a motion.
Also move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Next, we'll move on to community input. If there's anybody that would like to address the commission on items that are not on our agenda tonight, you are welcome to come up. It seems like we have some new people in the audience, so if you'd like to come and introduce yourself, feel free.
I do the audio-visual installation for you.
Okay, there we go. Then we will move on to our first discussion item, which is regarding the Hillside Management Zone. This is a discussion item, not a public hearing, so again, we'll let the people in the audience know if you want to talk, just come on down. We're not going to be formal about the time limit or anything. So we have a number of materials. Staff want to give us detail?
Yes, we do have a PowerPoint presentation for you, and we will have that queued up for you in one moment. And this will be a continued discussion item from our May 16th meeting, where we initiated the discussion regarding the Hillside Management Zone. So it looks like it's going to take a moment. This is a new video system,
All right.
and it looks like
It looks like they're
Having
using the
bit-
same old cameras.
bit of technical difficulties at this point.
One step at a time.
Yeah.
So essentially what I wanted to go through was there were a number of comments that the commission had at the May 16th meeting. And I had those on slide, but I can go through some of those with you right now. And staff proposed a number of different concepts to the commission at our last meeting, which identified possibilities or options how we could calculate gross floor area and limiting structures to 1 or 2 stories or encouraging basements. So that was,
We
yes,
just need you to log in.
okay. Looks like we have a moment to re-log into the system.
Okay.
No matter how far advanced you get, we'll still need passwords and logins.
Yeah. And we'll still put them on Post-it notes and stick them on.
I listened to a great podcast about, the CAPTCHA, that
Yeah.
the only one that they found to be 100% accurate was the one in which the instructions were given in Klingon, because somebody had to really go through a lot of work.
Well, you mean no robots getting through it?
Exactly.
Probably prevented a lot of
Apparently they have
humans
not programmed the robots to do in Klingon.
kerplow.
So we do have the PowerPoint back
Okay.
online now. And we'll go ahead and continue with the presentation. As I mentioned, the last time we reviewed the project as a discussion item was on May 16th.
We're not shooting up here.
No.
No.
Oh, okay. We don't
And-
need to move then.
No.
You asked staff to gather some information. Included in your staff report are the various definitions that were referenced in the zoning code regarding gross floor area, building height, and definitions of partial and full basement. You also asked staff to gather information regarding some of the hazard maps, our zoning map, Hillside Management Zone map, and we talked about providing the commission with slope analysis studies, and we've included 5 of those in your packet as well. And then ultimately, the commission will have to determine if they're going to appoint a subcommittee of this body to review and come up with recommendations that we'll bring back to the greater body. So at our last meeting, some of the feedback that we had at that time was to restrict buildings to a single story. The commission felt that that would result in larger homes and suggested that step pads work better with the hillside environment, that the building envelope currently identified in the ordinance to determine height is an effective tool. Also, secondary flat pads we discussed. If you have a larger lot and has a secondary flat pad, possibly that should be credited to determine gross floor area overall. And also to consider limiting the floor area of a second story to a percentage of the first floor. We did encourage the use of basements. That would not be counted towards gross floor area. However, a partial basement could be discounted and counted towards that gross floor area calculation. We also talked about restricting the primary structure only to slope categories 1 and 2. And if you recall, slope category 1 is from 0 to 14.99%, and then greater than 15% up to greater than 15% is slope category 2. We also talked about limiting accessory structures to a slope category 3.
Mm-hmm.
And restricting the height of the retaining walls. We touched on that. We can get into more detail as we move forward with this revision. And also to consider applying the design review findings that we find in design review permits to the hillside management zone. So these were the zoning definitions that were referenced. These are the sections. Those are identified or outlined in the staff report. We can look at those later on and as we move forward through the evening. But I also wanted to highlight the maps that are included in the packet. This is a fault line map, and of course it's showing the Sierra Madre fault line, the Raymond fault line, the Saw Pit fault up above. We have a seismic hazard map. So the area with the crossed hatched pattern in red is the liquefaction zone, and the other dotted pattern is indicating the landslide zone. You can see that's going in between the canyon, our canyon zone.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful.
And there is quite a bit of landslide zones up in the San Gabriel
Yeah.
foothills. Another map, this is a geological map, and it's basically the legend is identifying the different types of alluvium that are found within the San Gabriel foothills and how it intersects the San Gabriel city limits.
Who picked the colors on that?
This was, actually, we took this map from the final environmental impact report prepared for this zone.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I don't believe the alluvium changed since then.
Beiger.
So this is the transition line. It's basically showing a 15% slope transition. So anything within that area is 15% slope and above. Of course, there are flat pads that are created for residential purposes, but largely that's the transition line at that 15% gradient.
Which is slope category 1.
Yes, it's
0 to
it's actually slope category 2.
2, right.
Moving from 1 to 2.
We're moving from 1 to 2 on that line, yes.
Mhm.
This is the best we were able to find. This was also came out of the final EIR. We tried to find another, and we did find the hillside slope analysis map online as well, but it was still pixelated, and we'll see if we can find something better.
Still gives you a really, I mean, the fact that the lot lines are overlaid is really helpful, because on a lot of these it's hard to put them together, and this really gives you the general idea.
Our zoning map, the area in green is the location of the hillside management zone. So that's the entirety of the hillside management zone
Mm-hmm.
per zoning. And out of that, we identified, again, all the parcels that are highlighted in here Again, that's the hillside management zone parcels, but it's also delineated based on size.
Where is the yellow one? I didn't
Yeah.
see that one. It's so tiny.
There's one tiny yellow lot that's less than 6,000 square feet. I can't quite see the table from here. So there is a very sliver piece. It's even very difficult to see on the exhibit that we provided. And the exhibit that we provided and also displayed on the screen shows a number of parcels with the letter V, and those are the vacant parcels.
Mhm.
And there's a total of 9 vacant parcels. And those exclude the Stonegate properties.
Okay.
What's the difference between vacant 9 but occupied 38? Would,
Occupied are their structures on site.
okay, but that, wouldn't that be the rest of the, all of the? How many total are there? There's like 78 or something, right?
78.
So take the 9 away, wouldn't the rest be
Yeah,
occupied?
that would be, yes, I think that's an error on the map.
So it'd be less 78 minus 9.
Yeah, that's correct. And the area in dark blue indicates parcels that are 2 acres and larger. And to give you a scale, the largest blue parcel that you see to the right, upper right of the map, where you see that lot line, it is actually 86 acres in size.
Right. But a lot of that is,
It's very
Really
steep
steep.
hillside, category 4,
yeah,
and is generally, would be considered open space, not a developable parcel.
right.
But in terms of the overall scale, and then
But that's outside the stone
it's
house.
it's outside Stone
House.
Gate. That's the Stone House property.
Yes.
Oh, so the 86 is included in the
86
stone?
is because it's one large parcel.
But in the draft maps, wasn't that, or a big chunk of that part up north dedicated, or
As a-
supposedly going to be dedicated to open space?
Is,
So
yes.
we could rezone that to,
Right.
okay.
But currently, they would need to do a lot split to really designate the rest as permanent open space, but that's what it is. It can't be developed on.
Mhm.
And then we have the remaining lots, you can see, that are 2 acres and more, but most of them are around 2 acres. Most of them are already developed. There's a few here and there. And then the next line down from that, kind of the turquoise green, was 11,000 acre parcels, or 11,000 square foot to 87,000 square foot parcels. So they're just under 2 acres. And then we drop down to 6 to 10,999, which is the parcel shown in red, and that is the Stonegate property.
Right.
There's only 3.
So except for this one mysterious yellow one, most of them are over 11,000. I mean, they're all over 11,000 feet, because the Stonegate one has their own rules.
Smallest one, right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good news. I mean, that means we don't have some weird little outliers.
And then the next slide are the slope analysis studies. So you asked us to come back with a variety of exhibits. So we selected some from our Stonegate project. And essentially what we're looking at is a parcel, most of this is actually a 3.5 acre parcel. And you can see that in the darker hatched pattern that surrounds the property. You can see the cul-de-sac coming from the lower left of this exhibit. And then you see an access road and a pad. And both of those are slope or from 15 to 19%. And also from 0 to 15%. So you see some category 1 and category 2 slopes, and then pretty much going over to slope category 4, which is the 25% and over.
So this is very informative because while this lot is a large lot and goes all the way around the flood control access, the buildable part is,
11,000.
yeah,
11,500.
and that's it.
Right. So essentially what this exercise is showing us, right now we calculate gross floor area by the entirety of the lot.
Right.
And by showing the slope analysis, and one of our conversations was, do we only count the buildable areas, maybe slope categories 1 and 2, to determine gross floor area of the house? So it's really kind of discounting the very steep slopes on the property.
Right.
So I have 4 other exhibits very similar to this, and you can see variations in configuration. This is another Stonegate property, and you can see there are 3 flatter pads, 0 to 15%, and then various gradations, but probably almost half of the lot is slope category 4.
Right. This first one has not been graded with a pad, has it?
I think it has.
It has.
Oh, so the pad is down?
Yes.
Okay.
The pad is
But
here.
the rest of it is not touched.
Crest is not touched.
So it's
And that-
sort of a mix compared to the ones that
Right.
we've already seen that are completely
And that
graded.
you see the larger graded pad, and then you see a slight slope, and then a road. That's actually an access road. That's LA County flood
Yeah.
control
Did
access
we
road.
did we see this project, or was it the
No, we
right
saw the
below
one
it?
just below it. Yeah.
Below the
Below it.
access road?
Yes.
Yeah.
This
That
will
was the
be,
Bear Pond?
The
this
very
will be
end.
coming to you in July.
Hmm.
Okay.
And the access road is not part of the owner's use of the land? The access
It
road is,
The access road, that's how they will gain access to the site. They
But will
actually
it
go.
but
Mhm.
should
Will
we
it
keep it
count?
in mind as whether that grade counts for, that area counts for floor area?
Well, it's not in their property, though.
It is in their property.
It is?
Yes, remember, this property is 3.5 acres, and that's an access easement that crosses this private property to gain access to the flood control.
So the easement should not be,
That's something that we can determine if you have an access easement through a
Right.
property, should that be counted towards floor area? We're gonna have to make that determination.
I think there's going to be some interesting discussion about what's fair,
Right. And
being that somebody's already
well,
bought the property.
but this is covered by the settlement agreement,
This-
right?
right.
So
But
In
right
this
now, we're talking-
particular
right.
instance, yes.
Right now,
I
we're
was
talking
speaking generally.
hypothetical.
right.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the third D, Exhibit D.3. This is another one. This is another CET parcel. We did look at this before. They're in plan check. And as you can see, they have a larger flat pad. But this is, again, this is a regular lot where currently in the hillside management zone, the entirety of the lot would be counted towards gross floor area. And
Go ahead.
much of it is slope category 4.
right.
Going back to the previous example, where there are 3 separate pads?
Yes. So we talked about, should we count or allocate, so you have a buildable pad, and then there's a slope, and then you have 2 other flat pads further up the hill, and we talked about maybe crediting this property with those other flat pads to be allocated to the overall gross floor area.
So, but the structure for which will be affected would only be on one of those pads, or could they somehow use more than one of the pads?
I would say depends on how the split pads could work, because if, we are encouraging, and Hillside Management Zone already encourages properties to work with the land, the lay of the
Step up
land,
or
and
down.
step. So this is something that could be done. The distance between pads is fairly, maybe it's about 20 feet. So you would have to, they would involve additional grading and retaining walls to
Right.
be able to utilize that fully, but certainly that could be achieved.
You
Okay.
could potentially put outbuildings on.
And we talked about accessory structures even being built on Category 3 slopes. but
Right.
We haven't made that determination, but certainly, yes, you can put an accessory structure or a detached garage if you have access, for an instance, a driveway to get up to an upper pad.
Right, okay. That's very informative.
And then we selected 2 other sites, not on CETT property, but this is in general. This one is actually 2 lots. There's a house up above, but we just wanted to capture this one example. It's on a private road. And you can see that the pad is located towards the top of this parcel, and then you have a variety of slopes, but it is surrounded by Category 4 slopes.
Now, was this already created?
There's an existing house on here, and then there's a vacant parcel below it.
So this was
This is
part
the
of
vacant
theirs?
parcel below.
Okay. But as far as this map, did you create
We-
this,
we
or was
created-
it part of?
Yeah, we created it.
So does this parcel currently doesn't have a driveway or any access?
It does, so it's basically off to the far left,
Oh.
and then it's a private road, so it's kind of occupying the parcel or the adjacent parcel to the left and above as well. So it goes all the way up and then circles back to that flatter pads up above.
Mm.
And there's a building footprint even further up. And the next one is probably more reasonable. It's also involving an access road from the cul-de-sac. You can see there's a small road up there, and it winds around, and that's an access easement through LA County flood control property again. The only way to access this lot, and it does have a flat pad up top, is through the LA County access road. They do have a legal easement to gain access to this property. And they actually do have a water meter on this property.
Is it the road through the cul-de-sac, or that one on on the right?
No, the one on the right is actually a flood control channel, so
Oh.
it's through the end of the cul-de-sac.
Oh, you see it
The
going
cul-de-sac
off on the left.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
to
then
the
it
left.
must come
So
back.
somehow it
And then
circles about.
swings around and circles around.
Oh, interesting.
And that's where you can see the flatter
Yeah, the
grade,
contours.
Right.
almost like a resemblance of a road,
Yeah.
accessing that flatter part of the lot.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
like in this example, you marked these. Do we have what was the area? Like,
Yes, the area shown on
am I
the,
missing it?
I do have the area on there.
Yeah, can you give us it'd be great if you could give us the
Yeah, we
square footage
we
broke down by
did
slope
have it on here, now I don't see it on the legend.
Because these are, I mean,
I think the one on the last exhibit was over almost an acre.
it's really interesting because if you look at the survey map, this one,
The first one.
you've got one pad and then you've got this dog leg that adds to the square footage. That's an obvious thing that you think, okay, we really shouldn't be adding this. And you could just, multiply across and figure out what you think would be the right amount. But if you look at some of these other ones that have multiple pads, it's, there's a question of, do you want to try to actually limit the floor area to those pads and say, your total floor area is X, but you have to put this much there, or do we want to say this is the total, but we encourage you to break it up amongst pads? I mean, these are interesting questions that I think are worth delving into. I took the ratios of development intensity for subdivision that are already in the code, and they're based on, even though there's a 2 acre minimum, that sort of came in later, But the way the numbers work is, if it's slope category 1, it's 15,000 square foot parcels, right?
Okay.
And then as you get higher slope, it would require bigger and bigger parcel. And so if you take those same percentages and then that they do, but then you apply it to the floor area and do a calc, basically what it would do is it would say slope category 1 is 100%. Slope category 2, it calculates at 69%. Slope category 3, it's 17%. And slope category 4 at 1/3%. So 0.34%. So it's interesting because you look at, and I ran the numbers like on this one, and it would drop this one down to a total floor area of 1,633 square feet.
On this one?
This one, yeah. And I looked at the Bear Pool one that we looked at, Nathaniel Terrace, and that one, it would drop it down to 3841, which is interesting because it has 16,000 square feet of slope category 1, and we don't have this one here, I just looked online. But it also has 8,000 square foot of slope category 4, but it would only get credit for 28 square feet of floor area. So if we use those ratios that are already in there, it almost basically throws out slope category 4. I mean, it'd be interesting to run the numbers on this one, the really big lot, to see how much all that slope category 4 adds.
Well, it's,
But
what is it? We could.
Before
what
I
it
even
is.
go there, John, before I even go there, I'm fairly new to this whole issue, but this has a built-in bias against building on the steeper slopes.
Right.
And those can be overcome through good design. Let me just put that out there theoretically. So I'm wondering if we should be looking at it from the standpoint of what you have to do design-wise to build on the steeper slopes, as opposed to penalizing people who already own something that is steeper. There's some great architecture done on steep slopes. I'm not saying we have it all in Sierra Madre. We
Right.
don't, but
But as a safety guy,
yeah.
it's the steep slopes that provide the greatest risk from liquefaction and movement in earthquakes. And the more we provide allowances for people to build there, I mean, we're looking right now at a lot of people in the Midwest that built near a river and their homes are underwater.
I understand all that, yes.
And just the resources that this city has to come to the aid of people that build their houses on the side of steep slopes, after an earthquake, we can't come and rescue everybody because they built their house in a place where we know that there is a danger. And so, I mean, I think we have some kind of responsibility to limit and to mitigate the possibility of problems. I mean, our zoning needs to take into fact that we can't support. Now, maybe in the future when they have miracle epoxy concrete that you can glue a house to the side of a hill and it won't come off, we can readdress it. But right now, I think with our resources and what the city has, we can't be overly permissive in terms of where you build, because we can't go out there and help them when bad things happen.
I'm going to agree with you about the principle of that. However, when I have worked on this sort of project in another jurisdiction, that one of the planning hoops that I had to jump through, a hillside project, was specific review by the fire department for their access, and there were certain things we had to agree on that had to be put into the documents having to do with standpipes, roads,
And
all of
fire
that.
is only one of many. I mean, there's
Yeah.
we have liquefaction, we have earthquake faults, we have landslide. These are other things that happen in these same hillsides. The hillsides are full of challenges for you. So how they get addressed, I'm not sure I have the skill set to define exactly what it would take to make them totally safe. and make sure that the city is not gonna have to go up there regularly to pluck somebody off the side of a hill because their house moved. And that's happened in Sierra Madre. I mean, we have had houses fall off the side of cliffs.
We have some very funny old,
To that point, a small house versus a bigger house, I mean, just because the house is smaller doesn't mean it's
It's
less
safer.
prone to slide or
Correct.
to fall into a, you know,
A canyon.
with respect to what you were saying about landslide and liquefaction, you know that these areas have all been mapped out already, and there is building code, structural code, and other ordinances, some of which are at the state level, which address what you can and can't do building wise. And number one, we should know about this because we do not want to be trying to overwrite those things that are already in existence, possibly causing a legal conflict. And also, it'd be good to know that those issues are already covered elsewhere, and it limits what we should be saying. I'm totally in agreement with you about that, and I'm trying to find my way through so that we are not coming back and retroactively taking anything.
Well, I think
the
what
same
you
time.
said, one of the things you said before, Joe, is that we're trying to find what's equitable, and there's really a balancing act, because I think
Yes, it is.
I think that a lot of issues can be overcome by good design, but the flip side of that is it's easier to do good design on a smaller house on a lot than it is a bigger house on a lot, relative the size of the lot. So, you know, I think there's a lot of pressures pushing the size down. But on the flip side, you know, it's inequitable to say, oh, you only get to build an 800 square foot bungalow on your giant hillside lot. I just don't think that strikes any of us as equitable or fair. And so I think one of the interesting things about running some of these exercises is to try to take a look at these lots and think, well, if we apply this formula and it comes up with this number, does that make sense?
What you did is informative.
And to me, you know, like I said, I ran this one on this one because I had the data, and it came up with a number of 1,600 square feet, which just doesn't seem, it seems too small. I mean, currently allowed under the Hillside Act, our current zone would be 3,500,
But if you
and
look
on
at-
the old was 41, and those seem too big. But if we go down to 1,600, that just seems crazy.
But
small
if they
me.
were to build subterranean,
Yeah, they could add that. So one of the things that I also thought about was the issue of setbacks, because we talk about building pad, right? But if you have mandatory setbacks, doesn't a slope do its job if it's in the setback, right? I mean, does it have to be slope category 1 and a setback to count? Even if it's you know, hilly or whatnot, if it's a 25-foot front setback, it's doing its job. So maybe we should count that area more in slope category 1. But then the problem is, if you get some funny looking thing, you could maximize your amount of setback to try to gimmick that. So I don't know. There's a lot of issues.
but like this one right here, which I know, which this is the first one,
Yeah, D3 you're looking at.
D3. When you run, so the numbers you ran were, you get 100% of category 1, right?
Right.
So you get all the 5328.
Mm-hmm.
And then what was your sliding scale? Like,
It was, so in the subdivision, it's 2 lots per acre in slope category as opposed to 2.9. So 2.9 units per acre is 1,500 square feet per lot, right? And so
15,000?
15,000, sorry, yeah, right. And so then slope category 2 goes to 2. So 2 as a percentage of 2.9 is 69%.
Okay.
So, and then 3 is half a unit per acre, and that works out to be a 17.24%. So I'm not saying those are set in stone. I was just trying to use the ratios that somebody else already decided for some reason made sense for those slope categories.
But then what's our value right now as far as the floor area for hillside?
This,
Like, once you add up all that area, what do
okay,
you
yeah,
get?
for this lot, under our current hillside, it would be 3,500 square feet, actually 3,503. So it's 30%.
30%.
Up to 11,000, and then it's 10% for the above
Okay.
11,000.
So this is, okay, so up to 11, you get 30%.
Up to 11, you get 30%,
And then
right,
10% of
above.
the delta.
Right. And under the old hillside, which applies to most of the CETT, or maybe all, I'm not sure, it was 35, it was the same as R1, it was 35 and 15. And so that's why those numbers are higher under the older system. But then you get the issue of when you get to ones like this, I would guess that if you do the math under the current, it's the max, which is 6,000 or 6,500.
I mean-
Because all of that slope category 4 just, counts.
Even looking at all four of these, like, or five of these, there's very little transitional slope. So like you've got your category 1, and then there's very little
It goes
2 and
up.
3. There's a lot of 1 and a lot of 4
Right.
on pretty much all 5 of these examples.
Is that because their pad's already cut?
Well,
Well, that's why
yeah,
I think.
probably, but like,
you see a little bit more transition in these other examples, which I think are really useful. But even those have
very
a lot of
little though. They have a lot of
a lot of 1 and 4.
So that is informative in the sense of how your computation works, because if you allow 4, a percentage of 4, it's gonna add a decent amount of square footage, even at a lower percentage, to the computation. So right now, if you excluded it, I bet on these other 2 examples, the non-Stonegate examples, you'd be able to build a very small house, I'm sure, on these 2. Like,
So,
based on what's category 1 and if you got no 4, like.
Right.
so has Stonegate been mapped for pads?
They have.
Stonegate has.
Oh, Stonegate, not Stonehouse.
Right.
Stonegate.
Stonegate has not.
No,
One Carter.
one Carter
has.
has.
Heflin has not.
Stonegate has, that's at the top of
That's
Baldwin.
CETT.
Stonehouse is over
Yeah.
Correct.
by 108. That
Stonehouse does not.
has not. So what I'm thinking is, okay, so we don't have, there's an area where we haven't mapped out the horizontal and 4 categories, and so
We don't have lots. that's
we don't have lots even, but what,
We do have a vested tentative tract map that was never adopted, so we do have,
Something.
again, streets and pads, proposed graded pads. We can look at that.
But
as part
the
of
current
subcommittee,
things
right.
are not
But
graded.
it's not.
it hasn't been done yet.
Okay, let me stop us for a second because we have someone from
Okay.
the audience who would like to
I
address it.
want to introduce myself. Is this on? Do you need
Yes.
it? I'm Peggy Dallas. I live at 312 East Grandview here in Sierra Madre. I'm an architect, and I've recently applied to be on the Planning Commission.
Oh, fabulous.
So, and I really love
Excellent.
the policy discussions, and I gathered that's what this is. It's a policy discussion. And you're trying to come up with a policy based on grading, it sounds like. And I'm trying to figure out these are all graded lots. And so if you're trying to, do you have any grading ordinances here? I haven't looked.
Yeah,
How-
the actual hillside ordinance that we have now is actually based on natural grade, and these got graded as part of a deal. So, and that's one of the problems is we have the good data for the slopes on these, but these are they have manufactured lots or pads. I mean, so you sort of get this artificial transition. Whereas if you look at a native hillside lot, you hopefully would get a more rolling transition and a different understanding. And these that have been built on already that staff provided for us, they were probably graded, but not to the same extent. So they're closer to a native lot.
Okay, because In other jurisdictions I've worked in, they use like the average slope, which is maybe what you guys do here to determine how much you can build, the average natural slope. And to come up with a policy that's based on the slope of the pad, it seems like you're really encouraging people to pad the heck out of properties to get it down to as much property flat, and then you get the really steep slopes in between, if that's where you're going with the policy.
Right, and that's why it's
Which is why I
supposed
asked
to
the
be
question.
based,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be based on natural grade, not on as graded.
Yeah.
And
Okay, so
I
I
mean,
was
you-
just trying to understand.
Which is why we have one proposed area in town which has been mapped but not graded. And one of my questions is how is this policy going to influence or encourage or discourage people as they start up their bulldozers to grade the lots?
Yeah, this will send those bulldozers coming right on in.
Right.
If you go with the,
We also have to put some limitations on the height of retaining walls.
right.
As-
we-
as
we
part of
have-
this.
We have some of those, but
Need to do
I
that.
think they're perhaps not sufficient.
Okay.
We don't want it to look like Caltrans has been there.
So, and
Poor Caltrans.
thank you for your contribution, because this is exactly what we're trying to wrestle with.
okay, and then one other thing I read in here was you thought that a one-story, limiting it to one story would create bigger houses, and that may be true. Well, you still limit it to the square foot, but if you look at a house on a hill, a very large house that's flat, it's just this little line, and it's hard to see, especially if there's trees around it. But if you cram that square footage together into 2 stories, it's a chunk, and it stands out more. And so I'm not sure the one-story argument is really necessarily a good one, but, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
something to discuss, and so. Okay.
Yeah.
We're also concerned about sight lines and what you can see from different parts of the city. We asked developers to, give us their best guess on, because we're trying to limit the way that development impacts the view of the mountains for the rest of the citizens.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the developer and the house, we have to take into consideration the impact that the development has on for lack of a better word, the rights of the rest of the citizens to enjoy the hillside that's already up there.
Okay. I spent 25 years up in Los Gatos and was on a lot of the architectural committees up there for the town and helped write the hillside standards there. And one of the things they did in their policy was set up 3 viewpoints around town, because I don't know if you know Los Gatos, it's mostly hills with a little town in the center, in the flatland. And they had to judge each property from those sight lines,
Right.
those points. And so it made kind of a fair thing for the
Yeah, we have some sight lines and prominent ridge lines as well.
Yeah.
So it's actually the code is pretty good. It needs some tweaking, but it's not like we're starting from scratch.
Oh, good. Okay.
But this raises an interesting thing about going back in time. How were those ridge lines, those sight lines determined? Do we know where they were determined from? Were they from
Pajamas, whatever.
a particular point, like you're talking about that, that anybody could go to? And
Yes, like,
and-
for instance, the obvious point would be Baldwin, Sierra Madre. What does the hillside look like from there? But then you have to figure out where other noticeable places, it may be the park over here, the community park, and that might be one.
Maybe 1 or 2 places up high where people would look sideways.
Well, the applicant has to provide us that information from certain points.
Right, we have predetermined
Oh, good.
points in the
Yes, that's
city
right.
from various
do,
vantage points,
okay.
Yeah.
looking at the primary and secondary ridge lines and see
Yeah.
what that impact would be.
Okay, okay, thanks.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
So I just plugged in the numbers for this one with all of with the subcategory for it.
percentages.
Right. So it would the house that would be built based on those percentages, the max would be 3,385, and you'd only get 442 square feet of floor area for all of this slope category 4,
'Cause you-
because it's such a tiny percentage.
It's 0.34%
Yeah,
of,
less than 1%.
of the 128,000.
Right. And so under our current code, it would be 6,500 square feet, because that's the maximum. Because we have a hard max.
60, what's the 67?
6,500 square feet
Is what?
is
The hard max
current
in our
Under
code.
current code.
No matter what, that's what you're gonna
That's the
build.
biggest.
That's the biggest house you can do in
Okay.
Hillside.
Okay.
And I don't know.
Anything subterranean.
Yeah, the subterranean doesn't
No.
count as floor area, so
Right.
it doesn't. And I'm not sure if that cap applies on this lot at all, because that was the old code. But on our current code, it would be like, the calculation would be over 16,000 square feet.
But I'm
because
curious,
of all
like, the total area of this
Right.
lot is like 140, right? 140.5, 140,000.
Right.
What did you get on your table as far as what was able to be counted as the lot area?
The net, the adjusted lot
Yeah.
area would be under 12,000 square feet, 11,853.
Wow, after all that.
Yeah, because you've got 11,400 square feet of slope category 1, right?
Yes.
And that all counts, and
Yeah.
then you only get 442.
Okay.
And so, and that's why I said this, my first guess was just to apply these ratios, but it seems like to me you've got to have some sort of additional factor for setback or view shed or something, or maybe you measure it like around the pad itself, because it's sort of a step back from that as opposed to the property lines. Maybe that's how you do it. But if you just looked at this lot as a triangle of just the slope category 1, your gut instinct would be the amount of house you could build on that, you should be able to build on it, is smaller than with all of this slope category 4, because it provides some buffer and setback and, maybe not the stuff on the other side of the debris basin, because that seems like a dog leg that doesn't really add anything to this lot, but definitely the stuff that's nearby. So,
And actually, what's interesting about this lot is that lot is set back from the street, from the viewpoint. So it will be able to look out over the valley, but the valley will not be able to see it because it's set back enough.
right, I think that, there's all sorts of things about this that you're just not going to be able to capture with some formula.
No,
I mean,
you're
there's
not.
a certain extent you got to go, okay, we can only do so much.
But globally talking, like when you ran that number, so it spit out like 3,500 or something, right? That's house.
3385, yeah.
Does that seem, based on this, what's your first blush reaction to that number
Seems small to me.
for
Wow.
for this size of lot?
Yeah, don't you think?
But are we confusing the size of the lot with the impact that the structure is going to have in terms of what the rest of the world can experience? I mean, because you're right, this whole back end of it that's on their lot, but even the people that own the lot are going to have a hard time doing anything with it.
I think this portion of the lot ownership is more of a maintenance nightmare than it is
Yeah.
any benefit.
Brush clearance.
Fresh clearance is going to be,
Unless they hack the whole thing down and put, grapevines on it or something. And in a similar way, the Exhibit D3 that has this sort of dog leg at the back it doesn't really add anything.
Well, but this one's a good one because I'd be curious to see the numbers here, because this one, we've already proved the house that's going on here.
Right.
So it'd be good to see what it would have been, and
Well, this
we
one,
know what it is.
Yeah, under the old hillside zone, it was 4,155.
Okay, but then what?
Under the current hillside zone, it would be 3,503.
That's where we ended up, somewhere around there.
I think we were in between those, because this was based on the CETT, or one Carter was approved on the old hillside.
Agreement, yeah.
But doing those ratios, it would be 1,633, which strikes me as
That's small.
nowhere near
Yeah.
equitable.
So that doesn't work.
So that's why I'm saying we would need to factor in some buffer, setback, something.
And that's because in your calculation, the part that's over 25 is a higher proportion than the category 1, and you're getting like less than 1% of that.
Yeah,
So that's
it's a
why-
net. Yeah, right. So, I mean, it's interesting if you, the other issue is if you looked at, where's the one that has the 3 pads on it? Exhibit D2. You know, if you ran the numbers on this one, and then they tried to build all of the house that they could on one of the pads, you know, is that gonna cause heartburn?
That's what I'm concerned about.
But
So
what-
I'm
what-
interested to hear from the architects
Yeah, but
on your creative solution.
To me, I don't like dictating, well, you should build on the pad that's closest to the street or this one.
I'm not saying you
No, no,
can't.
no, I'm not
Just tell me, what do you do with that?
I would do, well, first I'd like to see how much house can I build? So if we get that number, I would, more than likely, the way it looks, this whatever you want to call that kind of square and the rectangle, those two sort of category 1, I'd figure out a way for the house to straddle the two, you know, and then use that slope between. Heck, I might even try to tuck in a partial basement into that pad.
Into the upper pad.
Yeah, and then, you know, or maybe my garage is on the lower pad and then house behind it. And then the second story, which really would be ground floor, would be the house, and I would straddle the 2 pads. But that would be my first blush. The triangle, the pumpkin triangle here, that could be an accessory structure or something.
Yeah,
else, but
a shop, a gazebo.
I mean, to me, that's kind of like, I mean, that's why you hire an architect, you know.
Absolutely.
They've got to figure that out. Like, for us to say, well, when you have a case where there's 3 category 1 pads, use the one that's closest to the street or whatever rules. I just think that's,
Is this already, in fact, been graded this way, or is this solely a slope analysis?
that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
On the
This is
grade.
on the stone gate.
Yes.
Yeah, what I'm asking is, has the bulldozer been there?
Yes.
Yes.
Many years ago.
This is a manicured pad,
Right.
a parcel.
So, for this lot 14,
Yes.
under the old code, it would be 4,959 square feet. Under the current code, it would be 4,039, and under the adjusted ratio, it would be 2,357. And so then,
What was your first total?
4,959.
Almost 5,000.
Do they say, I'm sure they say somewhere in here what that's allowed. I would assume that's the number. Yeah, but the interesting thing would be to me is if you could, you know, you could sort of rough estimate these pads and figure out what, you know, based on what 30%
Of the one?
of each of these pads would be, and see how much of a, you know, if you tried to put 2,300 or even 4,000 on one of these, how disproportionate it would look. And in a lot of ways, there's an unfortunate grading of the slope category 4 in between the 2 pads that are closest to the road, because like you were saying, you obviously, it seems like the thing to do would be to do a split step pad, floor plate, and use these 2 pads as one. And I guess, you know, we could still allow them to do that because really this wasn't slope category 4 before it was graded. I would assume there was a more gentle slope in between these 2 sort of flatter areas.
Yeah.
But this weird back triangle thing, I don't know what that is.
But see, based on that number, like, that's a huge reduction, like, from, I mean,
Yeah,
it
that's why I
doesn't
said it doesn't-
it doesn't seem as bad as this one, as D3, but it seems like that this parcel could hold a little more house, you know?
Well, however they
You
decided
pushed all
to,
3 of those
Well,
slot
if you-
lots
if you
together and
put-
made it one big pad, yeah.
Or if you just kind of worked, like you could spread the mass out onto like straddling the pads, even this pad this way, maybe you can tuck something in there. I mean, there'll be some grading, but
You've got to remember that however they made their decisions to cut the pads this way, that they created a lot of the slope category 4.
Right.
By virtue of leveling things
Oh,
out,
yeah.
so, you know. It's not as though it was a found condition, because it isn't.
I mean, I don't know. It's
But then you get back to, okay, they can build what, a 5,000 square foot house there. How does that relate to the slope, the whole slope of the lot? Is it something that they can do? We talked about whether a one-story house or a two-story house that follows the contour of the lot.
that's in the design guidelines. I mean, that's.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean,
I think
I'm not
when we
the
get,
architect, so it's
I think
hard.
when we get to subcommittee, we're going to have to do some trials where we go to scale on this and we superimpose some one-story, some two-story hypothetical building footprints and see more precisely what we are talking about here. I really do not have a good sense about how big like a 4,000 square foot single-story house is, what it looks like on this particular thing.
And if it's backing up against a steep slope and the house is stepped so that it follows the slope and it is not oppressive in its presence, I'm open to it, but I don't know how to put that into code. Does that make sense?
Well, I think one of the issues that we had is if you look at the guidelines and the building envelopes that are in a lot of the diagrams and the this, not this, I
Right.
think a lot of those tell you how to do it. The problem that we've had in the past, and I don't mean to single out Sierra Madre, I've seen this in a lot of other communities, is guidelines and diagrams and things like that are touchy-feely, subjective, and it's hard to enforce. It's hard to say, well, here's a formula that comes up with a number, and boom, that's a lot easier. And so there's the question of whether you want, how much of that stuff you want to try to translate from subjective good design guidelines into objective stuff, knowing that there's going to be plenty of individual cases where if you get too detailed, you're going to create a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And someone's going to have, 14 square foot house or something. I mean, I guess we'll have a minimum of 1,000. That's what we do in R1, right? On every house. So, but you might have some big lot that they could only build 1,000 square feet, which that doesn't seem right either. So
You may as well just go to form-based zoning
Well-
at that point, and that would be more, it would eliminate a lot of the touchy-feely that you're talking about, and it would also eliminate a lot of the mathematical complication, too.
yeah, but I haven't seen form-based zoning on Hillside.
I haven't either. I'm just starting to wonder about that. But
but
it
what
I mean, that's
could-
one of the
it
things.
could be interesting to do it.
If you have regular lots, flat regular lots, form-based zoning makes a lot of sense because you can sort of pick and choose and almost build out of Legos, right? But that's the whole nature of the hillside is you don't have those. You got weird, strange, funky-looking bits.
I know that. I'm not saying maybe somebody has done it. I just got interested in this
I mean,
as we're talking about it.
D3, the reason I keep going back to this is because we went through the entire process on this parcel. And from the get-go, like, it just from a common sense standpoint, like, all of that category, that flag portion going back was part of the calculation, because it's the entire lot for the house that you can build. And it is clear, like, when we look at that flat area, like, 4,000 or whatever the number was too much house for that pad.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how you pushed and pulled it, did whatever you needed to do, even with the setbacks. The setbacks basically not made it worse, but it basically you had to build it right there. There was
Right.
no other place you could put it because all the setbacks, you know, the cumulative side yards, the front yard, and the rear, like, there was no backyard. I mean, that thing had like 8 feet till.
Right at the back, and then it
Took
went
off.
straight up.
But I mean, the point was like, it was really shoehorning in that house onto that. And part of the problem was because you could take all of this area that you probably would never build on or can't build on, but it added to your floor area. Like on this D3 example, an ideal size house was in that 2,500 square feet, like that.
Yeah, that was my gut.
That
It was
in that ballpark,
Yeah.
you know? And we were, I know we weren't double, but we were, 50% more. I mean, whatever we wound up getting on there, but, and I don't know how that translates, like, to me, that's the common sense. That doesn't pass, it didn't pass the eye test. Like, it's just, so how that gets, and I don't know if there's a formula that will spit that out, proportionately to, if it's, D1 or this.
So what about the, using the lot that's within a certain radius of the house? As opposed to, I mean, because, D1, there's a lot there, but it's not proximal to the house.
Yeah,
I mean, the house has a setting.
yeah.
I mean, and one of the things that gave us heartburn on this one is the house has a setting, but there's this dog leg up here that is influencing the size of the house relative to the lot.
Yes.
So suppose we say, okay, here's the pad, and we're gonna draw a circle around that pad, and everything that provides that house with a context for why it is where it is counts towards its size. And the stuff that's around the corner that we can't see shouldn't influence how we decide on how big the house is. Because we can't see it, and neither can anyone else.
That's
Well,
that's a very good idea. That's a very good idea. If you think back into the history of how this overall property was chopped up, and it's like this dog leg, it's just a residual piece of something. It really doesn't have any effective bearing on what we normally consider in zoning at all, does it? So maybe if you do what Bob is saying, that in effect, maybe that's with a requirement that it be left in its natural state, and it almost is like, we'll make this simple, but this is going to be a give back to the environment. It could be a very cool way to approach the whole thing.
Well,
So-
whether it's a give back to the environment, its presence doesn't give the house more permission to be larger. Does that make sense?
Yes.
right.
If we had a little house on a big lot down here in the flats, we would say, oh, we could put a
What a
bigger house
waste.
there because we can see the whole lot. But if we have a big house on a lot that we can't see all the parts of, we could say, well, why'd that big house get on that little lot?
Right.
And they would say, well, because if you look around the corner, I got a lot of other land. Well,
Right.
you and I don't see the land.
I'm in agreement with you.
I like your idea, and I wonder if that goes back to what you're saying with what's within the setbacks.
Right. Well, I think the issue with if you went based on setbacks for the lot, you'd go around and then you'd take a portion of this little dog leg business, right?
You would.
And you'd over calculate. But if what you did is you take the sort of pad area and then you did a buffer zone around that, right? I mean, this is pretty close to 100 by 50, the pad. So if you did a 10-foot buffer around these two sides, and added that as if it were slope category 1, because it's serving a buffer function, then you'd get a 2,083 square foot house. If you did a 15-foot pad, you'd have 2,300 square feet.
Now that feels more like the house that should have been there.
So maybe the thing to do is identify the pad or the contiguous, because one of the things in the subdivision discussion is you need to have a contiguous area of slope category 1, 2, or 3 that's 3,500 square feet when you design your lot. So maybe you take that contiguous area and you put that buffer around it, and that's the way you calculate.
Okay, but how, would that work if you just, instead of a buffer, I'm just throwing it out there, setback, like if you took your setbacks, is it, my first question is, on some of these lots, like either D3 and even D1, it's pretty straightforward how the front setback's set and the sides, I guess, but how are we determining rear setback? Because,
I don't know, on this one, wouldn't we have a setback that goes all the way around the property line?
It does, and it has, yeah, and. when
There is
it's
no
going
rear,
through,
right?
it's
So, I mean,
regular.
the issue you'd have there is on this one, you'd, with that setback calculation concept, you'd reach the max. Because you'd go all the way around. And so I sort of like the idea of focusing on the pad. The issue then, but if you did that focus on the pad business, is
what do you do
what do you
for-
do on this one?
yeah. Well, I think they're,
Why did they do that to begin with, and create those
Could have been the
category
guy that drove the
fours?
dozer for all we know.
Well, let's look at one that's not so manipulated. Let's look at Exhibit D4.
that might be an outlier, 'cause-
Because here you've got sort of your main contiguous pad which is accessed by a private road, but then you've got these other areas, and so do you know, I mean, this part down in the southwest, you could definitely put an outbuilding in there or something. So
down at the bottom.
yeah. So do you want to count that, or do you not count that, and do you put buffers around each one? I mean, this is almost this lot is almost an acre. It would be interesting to have the total the breakdowns
numbers,
by
yeah.
slopes, but I mean, there's still quite a bit of stuff down here that you could conceivably do reasonable building on.
But your buffer idea would be, you'd basically take this finger right in the middle and go some feet out from that and create your ring, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that number is.
We're designing the houses schematically now, aren't we?
Well, I mean, I
Well, I
guess
mean, the way to do it there would be, like that one, you would give them the buffer on the primary pad,
Mhm.
but you wouldn't let them lose the category one. You'd
You'd
add
still
that
add
in.
all that
You'd
in.
add that in
You just
too.
wouldn't add a buffer,
No, you wouldn't add a buffer.
but
Buffer
for,
would be for a primary. Now, this is obviously, this rule or this idea is for lots that have a pad, right? That have category one, right?
well, if you
Like,
don't
how
have
do you do,
category
how do
one,
you, okay, what about, let's take the Heflin properties. Like,
That's-
what if there is
Stonehouse Canyon.
no pads there
Right.
on some of the lots? Like,
So what will this encourage them to do as they create the pad?
oh,
well, but
Like old
this
stated.
this should be, I mean, according to the code, as currently even written, not like as we envision, you're supposed to do this math on the natural slope,
okay, so.
not pre-grade.
So we get a bunch of we get surveys, a civil survey, right? For they're gonna have to cut some parcel lines, right,
Mhm.
on their track map. So they're gonna have these lines, and what they would do is produce a bunch of these, you know, or actually a survey map with the categories mapped out
Mm-hmm.
before any grading happened.
Right, and the issue, part of the issue we found on One Carter was when you do that by aerial survey, you capture vegetation as well, and so some of the slope, I think in One Carter changed a lot after they sort of started doing brush clearance, before they did any grading, so you can only get so close. I mean, there's a lot of
But in theory,
fudge factor in a lot of this.
theory, they would need to be aware of whatever determines what you can build before they cut their lots, their lines,
Well, yeah,
because
that's what
if you didn't have any category one.
right, and that's contemplated in the
then that
current
would be a
code.
parcel you can build on.
Because under current code, you have the slope categories factoring into the density. And on each lot, you have to have a contiguous area of slope category 1, 2, and 3 that's at least 3,500 square feet.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what you have to do. I would assume it wouldn't be done necessarily to this detail, but I don't really know
Well,
how.
you'd have to get a survey of each lot prospective lot, and they'd have to map out the slopes. They have to.
I'm sure that
Like,
they
this is not basic, but like, I mean, this is a detailed survey.
Yeah.
But I'm sure once they started dividing the lots, if the lot didn't have very much category 1 in it, they'd have to make it big enough so that it did.
But they couldn't, because we would be looking at this before they cut.
Well, but
Cut
that's,
anything,
but
right?
the map comes in. I mean, that's the whole thing, the map comes in and we review it.
Yeah, okay, but what I'm trying to clear out is the notion that, okay, I need a bunch of category 1, 2, and 3. So on a natural hillside, and I've got my lots, I would just go in and do grading before I'd get a grading permit and start creating some of that contiguous land.
Category 1.
And that's exactly what you're not supposed to do.
Okay, but so
And
there
that's
is a
why-
mechanism that prevents that.
And that's why it's, well, you have to get a grading permit to do extensive grading, right? And hopefully, somebody would say before they grant the grading permit, no, you can't just go start grading, right? But the other side of it is, this is a really neat hypothetical exercise, but if you look at the lots, we don't really have, I mean,
Too many to work with.
we don't have, the subdivision is not so much of an issue anymore. Unless, you know,
Stonehouse would be the only.
unless there's a current property that has to undergo some of this, and we're probably not gonna change the subdivision rules on them, or, you know, there's a potential, institutional property that could switch to residential, but that's already been graded.
One of the things that we're going to have to do at some point is this. Staff may have obliged us very, very well by presenting us with some of the tastiest examples around. We really should see if and thank you for doing that, because it's, you know, it's really like prompted a lot of good discussion. But I'm wondering, in the overall of all of the properties that we do have to address under this work, whether these are the outliers in terms of complication. What does this look like? The situation look like in the overall, and are we? I want to make sure that we don't make too many complicated rules based on just a handful of outliers, where actually most property owners would have a simpler situation.
Well, it looks like,
So I'd like to get some evaluation on that issue at some point.
We certainly could identify a few other lots that, ungraded lots, in the hillside management zone that we can use as examples. We can provide that.
Is that the vacant ones or no? Those are just like there's no building on them, but they may have like what are the V's?
Yeah, they're vacant parcels.
So this
and there's
one's
only
right
9.
here.
There's only
But
nine.
one
Well,
one
that-
is tremendously huge.
that one. I think you don't.
Right.
I don't think you deal with that.
I think there's a couple that might have got,
Because that hasn't been. I mean, that would get either sectioned off.
Yeah, that's this, and it's going to get,
This
yes,
doesn't, like, I don't think
Right.
you can do anything with that. The lower part.
that, right, down here is where we're going to make our money, yeah.
And it's pretty flat down there.
yeah.
Well, the canyon,
Oh, this part down here. But these other V's up here might be interesting. The ones that are, there's a couple. Well, they're mostly
There's a couple of,
ordered a 2-acre.
inconsistencies between the zoning map and the parcel data map. And I don't know, I know we had so many different moving pieces that I don't know if all of these are, or which ones are right, but on Oak Circle to the west, on the zoning, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lots? And there's 2 of them on the HMZ parcel data. And I think there's 1 lot over above Auburn, too. Maybe 1 over.
Wait, where you Oak?
Okay, if you compare the.
Yeah, I'm
go
looking at
Oak
both of them.
Crest,
Yeah.
there's a few here that aren't reflected here.
Or we can't see them because of the color.
They're in the hillside management zone, they're just,
Well,
you're saying they need to be included on this map?
well, I think we just need to check because they're not in the this parcel inventory of the HMZ parcel data, but they're shown on the zoning map as being an HMZ. So
Yes.
I think it
I'm not
comes-
sure which is right.
I think it should come down further. It should match the zoning map. So it looks like we're missing,
A few lots there.
yeah.
Up at the top of Oak Crest.
Yeah, right there.
Top of Oak Crest, and then
Where the pyramid house is.
There's like 4
north of Auburn,
north of.
it looks like there's a few more on the zoning map than on the parcel data.
There's that whole section above the settling basin.
No, there's this one right in the donut right there that's gray in the middle.
Yeah, 756.
There, that should be, it's green on the HMZ.
Yeah, so it would be good to double check some of those, but I think if we take some of these, especially if we just, I mean, you could just take these vacant lots and look on Google Maps, you know, an aerial view, and just get a sort of gut look at.
Well, you can get like, so I produced this right before the meeting. You just go on county's GIS,
Yeah.
and this is one of the One Carter properties.
Did
But you can get
you-
all the topo and,
I looked on that and I didn't get that level of detail. Did you have an account that you logged in? No?
I just
Oh.
went into their GIS net and you can zoom in. You can actually go closer than this. It just won't print on a page, but you can
Okay.
get up to 1 to 200 scale.
Okay.
So-
Well, that's
So
pretty
you
good.
can get that on any lot. And if there's a structure on it, it actually shows the structure too.
Right. I wonder too, on some of these long skinny lots, if they're under common ownership, because they look pretty undevelopable.
What the,
It's single
looking
lots.
at?
On, what is this, north of the canyon?
Okay.
north of
Gotcha.
the
Is that Mountain Trail? I'm not sure where that.
Yucca Trail? No.
Yeah, the Mount Wilson Trail. There's, which is north of the canyon. There's a few of these little skinny lots.
Oh, those are,
Some of those are city-owned or conservancy open
Mhm.
space lots.
Okay. And there's this one long skinny one
Oh, Wilson Trail, yeah.
over by the Heflin property. Is that part of the Heflin property?
The long blue
The
one?
long skinny
Blue one.
V?
I
There's
don't,
actually two of those.
yeah, I don't
two of those,
believe
John, another one
so.
down from there.
didn't
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
come to us once and they wanted to develop that thing and it was, and once he found out about the hillside management, he went away and never came back.
What a mess.
Yeah, I actually remember seeing like
Yeah.
it was like 9 or
It
10
seems
lots.
like the address on the zoning map says 723. It's north of 723 Lotus Lane. Maybe it's under joint ownership. I don't know. It's just, and if it doesn't have, an access road, what are they going to do? So some of these maybe aren't even realistic. I know that that's an issue we have in the canyon. That there's
Actually,
a lot of lots without access.
Oh, yeah, that one.
They're on the books as separate lots, but
Well, there is the one, see, that's another one that's missing, this long, says vacant, it's got a V on it, the long blue one right there,
Mm-hmm.
adjacent, but right below it, that's in Hillside too.
there are two long skinny ones that don't have these on them,
Ah, yeah.
Can't
right
read.
below.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that a
coming off of Lotus Lane.
Mm-hmm.
Next to 7-Eleven, which is
Mhm.
not Hillside, but off of Lotus Lane, yeah. I mean, that's how you would access both of those, right?
Isn't Sunrise Hill the private street in the middle of all that, too?
It is.
Yeah. Lotus Lane is, actually, you know what that is? That little green, that's the beginning of the driveway to the Heflin property. This goes up,
Where off
Yeah.
Lotus Lane?
yeah, that little tiny green sliver that goes north.
Oh, yeah. But see how there's 7-Eleven, there's a,
Right, at the very end,
next to it,
right,
and then next to that, there's another.
correct. And that is Hillside and it's not over
But
here.
you can access that lot, right?
Right,
From-
it fronts on Lotus.
Yeah.
And actually,
Yeah.
7-Eleven has been to this commission at one point in time.
7-Eleven, which road?
Lotus
South
Lane,
Lotus
that
Lane.
last one on the end. Remember the guy put a two-story big
an
old house on
R1.
that thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
That was a long, long time ago.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these, I was just looking at the Google Maps, a lot of these off Mount Wilson Trail are actually off the part where it's a trail and not a road. So, it's not gonna, yeah, these just aren't gonna get built.
Interesting.
So I guess we can try to dig through some of this, or we can get a subcommittee to dig through some of it, or what do you want to do? Because it seems like we got to test some of these formulas, but then we also need to do just a gut check on looking at the parcels, because we can't just march forward some formulas and vacuums.
No, I mean, I think,
Please.
Come on up.
It seems like you're dealing with two different issues here. One is, they're all the hillside management zone, but one is undeveloped property with no grading. And the other is property that's been graded or has already been built on and might burn down and become an infill situation, but both those two are kind of the same thing. And the undeveloped properties seem so few, and it sounds like some are even conservancy. I don't know, did I hear that? That those could be looked at one by one and determined what the issues are with each if we're trying to head off potential problems. But then the infill, you know, maybe this pad formula has some potential. I don't know.
yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there to.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue that we're going to have is exactly that you're saying, is people who are doing room additions and things on existing houses. And that's another issue we need to keep in mind. If we start shrinking the allowed floor area down, people are going to come in sort of like the, you know, the house that has the wisteria on it. Oh, I just want to add a 79 square foot bathroom. And we're like, oh, too bad, you're over the square footage. You know, and there that's again where you're up against an objective number. So,
Yeah. But there may have to be some other mechanisms for that in terms of, I don't know.
agree?
Just a quickie, with respect to properties up higher off Mount Wilson Trail and probably a bunch of other properties, we really need Caroline Brown's input on this, because the Conservancy has been reasonably careful in acquiring properties that have conservation easements that will prevent access to some of these lots and thereby prevent their development. So it seems to me that using those particular properties as examples of anything, well, what they're examples of is stuff that you can't get to, full stop.
Right, right. And so the only thing that size would limit is the size of tent somebody could pitch if they.
I'm sorry?
I said the only size would be the size of a tent that somebody could pitch if they hiked up there.
Well,
I mean, I'm teasing. I'm not going to
yeah.
limit anybody's tent size.
Well, if it's a two-story tent.
yeah, perhaps, but again, they're having to cross protected land.
Right. Do we have, I would assume the Mountains Conservancy has a map that
Oh,
shows
yeah.
their ownership and also the conservation easements, it would be great if we could get a look at that too.
Well, the reason this comes up is that it shows 9 vacant lots.
That
And
was-
while they are vacant, they may not be accessible.
Well, they may not be developable.
Well, and developable for a number of reasons, one of which is access.
Correct.
So-
And that is fully intentional.
And we get that. So, but what one of the things we're trying to figure out is, well, what is the scope of this challenge that is, in front of us? We know that there is going to be some development in one part of the city, but there's these other onesie-twosie lots that are out there that some we need to have a policy in terms of their development, and others we can ignore because they cannot be developed.
That was my point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's a very good point, because we shouldn't waste all our time fretting over the ones that aren't going to get developed and
Right.
trying to make sure we make rules they don't get developed poorly when they're just never going to get developed.
Marguerite, do you have any sense at all about how many different parcels have already been assigned to the Conservancy that you're referring to here? Is it 3? Is it 20? I'd like to get a handle on that.
Caroline, when she is able, would be able to give that information. Those undevelopable lots, I don't believe, are as such Conservancy property. It's little tiny parcels, at the trailhead, and a few little things like that, that protect those parcels from development. Though they are not in themselves protected. It is the access that is prevented. You can't cross certain land in order to get there. In fact, there was something over basically on the Arcadia side where somebody was going to try to develop this parcel. This was way over near Santa Anita. And Caroline came up and made note of the fact, nice property, but you can't get there. But again, it's not owned by the Conservancy. It's protected by Conservancy holdings.
And the Conservancy properties are generally indicated in the zoning map as open space forests.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we need is sort of like the majority. If this map is pretty good in telling us that out of the 80 some lots, 55 are sort of in that quarter to 2 acre ballpark, right? And those are going to consist of there's some that are vacant, there's some that are developed, right? It seems like we need some representational properties that cover sort of the developed, parcel, or the already graded parcel, but vacant, and then sort of the untouched parcel. And I don't think we should obviously focus on anything that can't be built on, for
Right.
whatever reasons that's out. I think the vacant that's untouched, probably the biggest piece would be whatever this stone house thing becomes, right? I mean, I guess there's some other ones, but I think we need like a couple or 3 in each sort of category, because I think we are dealing with, like what was said, 2 issues. Sort of the ones that already have their pads, and that also is the same as if you had already a house built,
Right.
right? So that's like its group, and then the other group is sort of the natural undeveloped.
Right,
thing.
and the other part about that is, if somebody's going to do an addition onto their house, they're going to do an administrative hillside permit, and you do that as graded. You don't use the natural grade. We don't ask somebody to go back and research
Yeah.
what was the grade before you built the house.
Yeah.
We just say, okay, this is what it is now, and we use that. And so it makes it a lot simpler.
So there may be 2, not formulas, or then we got to look at them both, but we need whatever parcels we're going to look at in those things, and then run it through sort of the calculation, also the buffer idea, then straight, like if you didn't allow any category, like whatever our different ideas are, run them all through and see what you get. I mean, it's going to be very clear, like one works and one doesn't,
Right, and the other thing is to look on the examples of already built houses.
Yes.
To see how much is already there. I mean, I know the county numbers aren't great, and you have to sort of jimmy in a estimate for parking garage and whatnot. But still, if you have houses that are, 3,500 square feet and your calculations are coming up to 1,800, you've got a problem.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
One question I had for council is that what are people's rights to use their land if they don't have vehicular access? Do they have a right to build a house if there's no road access?
They're going to have to seek an easement or some access. You can't really construct, you can't really build on a lot that has no access. It's that's one of the findings that you have to make in order to be able to legally subdivide, is that there's
But if somebody's got a
access.
big lot,
Uh-huh.
and you can only get to it by a trail, and they say, "Oh, I'm gonna go up there and
Build a cabin.
build a cabin with my bare hands," blah blah blah. Can we say no because we say no? You don't have a road.
They would, well, if they come in and ask for a permit to build, yeah, we would say you need a road.
You still need a utility
Yeah.
easement.
From the fire service, we would need to get to it if it catches
Exactly.
on fire. And if you can't
Right.
drive a fire engine to it, then probably are not interested.
Is that specific point codified anywhere?
Well, I believe it's in general subdivision. That's probably, that's where I would look first in Sierra Madre's code, just to show, hey, you've got to have access.
Yeah, because I'm just quickly looking at Google Maps from a lot of these vacant ones. They just don't have road access, and there's this one that's the big sort of hill behind Nature Friends that's accessed off of Yucca Trail. It's just a trail, and there's these ones off the Mount Wilson Trail, and they're all really, really steep. So
They'd have to do, they'd have to provide access, they'd have to create an easement over property somebody else owned, but I mean, there's no inherent right to do that. If someone purchased a property that has first of all, it's odd to think that a lot with absolutely no access to anything was legally subdivided, but we know there's a lot of lots that weren't legally subdivided.
I mean, there's a few that are on streets, but they're like this one off of, I guess, well, maybe not if that's the trail. But off of like Amo Drive, there's a solo guy out here.
That's the last example that we provided to you,
Oh, you did? Okay. Oh, that's it.
D5.
There's another kind of example, though, the property next door to me at 444 North Lima. It was purchased in 1939 by the previous owner, and it's about an acre total. There is a one property approximately square at the street, a division and a second parcel of about the same size directly behind it. And I don't know what the situation was in 1939, but it still shows as two separate parcels. But they're in either one of them is large enough to build on. So that's another kind of situation.
It's hard to say. There's remnants happen, people illegally subdivided, flag lots are created with a situation just like that, where you have two legal lots and the one behind has absolutely no access. And it's not up to the city to provide it. The
Right.
property owner's got
But the
to.
thing on that one, and those sort of examples in flatland is, if somebody owns a orphaned lot, they could potentially go to the person who
Exactly.
is between them and say, "Hey, let me build a driveway here. I'll pay some money," because it's just flat, your yard. But on a lot of these hillside ones, there's just nowhere to build a road. I mean, you would have to build a road through a mountain.
And if it's category 4, you can't.
Yeah, so
So,
it
yeah.
it just ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, there's, while we think a lot about Walden Pond and going and building a little place with your own hands, right now there's a lot of fascination about small prefab units, vacation units, that sort of thing. Yuppies will drop them in by helicopter. Okay, there's a lot of variations going on right now, and a lot of fascination with tiny houses, many of them as vacation places, and so it won't be we're potentially talking about a lot more than just the occasional Walden Pond kind of old school guy.
Well, we'll have to amend our code when we have Uber Air.
What do you want to do?
So what do we want to do?
I think this is enough stuff that it needs to be chunked offline, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we need to visit some lots
Yeah.
and also run your numbers. And actually, the good thing is that we have some lots on Stone Gate that we can walk around and play what if.
Right. And I mean, we just need to keep in mind that that's been groomed.
Right,
But-
but it's an example of what could or could not happen.
Right. And it's also useful as a lot more of those are going to come forward to us.
In Stone House.
Stone Gate. One Carter Stone Gate.
But those are,
The future ones are going to be in
Stone
stone.
House, yes.
House.
That's subdivision. Potentially. But they're talking about merging lots, right?
Stone House has is also party to the same settlement agreement. A portion of it applies to them. And I believe they originally had an approval under the settlement agreement for 19 lots laid out in a certain way. Because they don't have sufficient water meters, they're precluded at this time from going forward with developing those. I think there's maybe only one or two. And they've toyed with the idea over time of doing a different subdivision, merging some lots, coming up with less lots, but less dense development, but maybe bigger houses in one of the really large lots where no one can see the house anyway. But nothing has been fully fleshed out. I will say that they're very cooperative and that they, unlike some developers, they talk to the city, they want to cooperate. They're not trying to do this.
If I don't know, if I ask a question you can't answer now, that just tell me. But if they did that, would that come through the regular process, or would that be through negotiations, settlement talks?
It would come through the regular process if they want to, well, okay, I think you're asking two different things. If you're asking me, would the existing rules apply to them if they want to come off the settlement agreement and do something completely different? I think we would talk about that and have to see and possibly negotiate that. But they've got the safety of the settlement agreement, and if they wanted to make the lots bigger, less dense, more house, they would need an amendment to the settlement agreement, and that's a negotiation, so
But if they came through us,
they're going to come through you. Yeah.
But I mean, we as a commission have no power to amend any settlement agreement or anything. But
Right,
we could
that's
say,
correct.
If it was a design that looked good but didn't
Yeah.
meet the code, we could say it has these issues with the code, but overall we think it's better than what's already been settled to. So
Right.
we recommend to the council to.
We've been trying to get them to do something like that in a public process for a long time, to get a read first of what the community would like before they try to go to council and ask the council to amend a settlement agreement that many years ago, there was a lot of public participation in crafting.
Mm-hmm, there was.
Okay,
And they listen.
good. Okay, who wants to do this?
I'll participate.
Okay. Can we do 3 with a 6-member commission? Or is that we're not quorum yet, right?
If there's 6 of you, a subcommittee of 6 is too many, that,
Right, but 3 we could do.
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you can do 3 with 6 people. You haven't hit quorum yet. That's
Better we
right.
could hurry up and make the appointment.
Who else?
I'm gone in July, so
Okay.
you probably don't want me because you don't want to wait.
You want to jump in on this?
Sure.
Okay, I'll do it.
All right.
Let's us 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have printed out 40 scale maps of the exhibits for you to take home as well.
Okay, great.
So you can scale from those.
And if you could email on the existing ones, I forget which numbers those were, the square footage in each slope
Yes.
category, so we can
The
we
AMO
can
and
plug
the-
those in and try to work on those.
So I'll do those last two, D4 and D5.
Yeah.
That's not going to be represented in the exhibits I'm going to give you, but I'll give those to you. and
Okay.
then I'll replace those.
I want to commend staff on the maps.
Yeah, this is great,
Yeah,
These
thank
are-
you very much.
These are really helpful, I agree.
except for the colors on
The fill type.
Oh, yeah.
You have to talk to the EIR consultant on that.
beige, tan.
Dark beige, light beige, medium beige. Okay, well, that's our discussion. We don't have any public hearings or anything else, so we will move on to Planning Commission reports. Anything?
I've got a couple of items. I forgot to mention last time that I had just attended the California Preservation Foundation annual meeting, which was held in Palm Springs this year, and I happened to make the acquaintance of the current SHPO, State Historic Preservation Officer, Juliana Polanco.
Okay.
So that was good. The other one is that starting in the fall semester, I'm going to be an adjunct professor in urban and regional planning at Cal Poly Pomona.
Oh, cool.
I'll be teaching undergraduate urban design.
Except on Thursday nights.
I don't go that late.
Actually,
The students will, but the professor will be gone.
the students have a field trip on Thursday night.
So
Poor
now that,
students.
now that you're a Bronco, I have to tell you, that we refer to that as the other Cal Poly.
But we'll have some discussion about that. I'm still orange.
Nothing.
Okay, I wanted to report that I went to a city council meeting where they discussed the general concepts of downtown zone amendments. And it was very helpful. I think council was very much on the same page as we are. They had a couple of different ideas on maybe where to set the thresholds than we did, but the whole concept of changing by size.
I saw that. It was great.
But they actually went farther than we did and said we need to address parking.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to have a meeting with them as part of the liaison function, where we're also another council member will meet, and then we'll iron that out. But I think most of the code revisions we used before will probably be usable, but we'll need to look into what we want to do about parking.
I commend you on that because for a while I was wondering whether the Planning Commission and the council were in two different orbits around two different planets. And it was very refreshing to see that there were a lot of commonalities and they were very open to everything that you were talking about.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about different
No.
places at all.
Did we, refresh my memory, did we touch parking at all in relation to the commercial?
We talked in some of the stuff about some ad hoc ability to have relief through
Okay,
a hearing process.
yeah,
But we didn't attack the
the actual.
actual numbers itself.
Right.
And I think there was some talk of just getting rid of it all, but there wasn't really the stomach for that.
Oh.
But there is a desire to sort of streamline, simplify, and make it less of a hurdle, especially for restaurants.
But we were reticent to get rid of it all because we didn't know how it would be whether it would be accepted or not.
Right.
And so what I heard was that we got a green light to be more aggressive in that regard.
And that we would, and that basically, the strict requirements would, by the numbers would kick in if you were doing a large piece of new work like the Kensington, but that we were going to lift a lot of restrictions that made reuse of releasing of existing storefront so difficult.
Right, and I think.
And how did they go on that?
We've actually done that. I mean, the city, as part of the non-conforming ordinance, which the city council adopted at the end of 2017, right? Or the beginning of 2018. We basically said that any commercial space that's 2,500 square feet or less is considered parked. So it doesn't matter if you switch it from a nail salon to a restaurant, to tchotchke shop or whatever, you've got your parking, and so that will help. The problem is there's been a delay in getting the stuff online, and then also it's sort of a strange place for it, and it's not cross-referenced from the commercial code or the parking, so a lot of people don't know about it. So when we update the commercial code and the parking code, we can cross-reference that, and it'll be a lot more user-friendly.
Thank you.
So, do we know when, are we gonna know when that meeting is, or?
We're trying to set that up for the end of June. So I'll be sending out an email to the council representatives, as well as the chair and vice chair are going to be sitting on that subcommittee
Okay, great.
of the planning commission.
Okay. Do we have stuff an update from staff?
So the only item we have for our next planning commission meeting, which is June 20th, is the continued CETT, which is lot 21. So we've seen that twice already. They're coming back for a third review.
Which one is that? Refresh my
So
contemporary one?
So that one is now been, it used to look more or less Cape Cod, and then it went contemporary.
Oh, that's right.
And now it's coming back as kind of a mid-century design.
All new.
Yes.
It's the one that's
I know which one.
just south of the driveway to the
Yes.
Right.
The cap.
prior house.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Good.
right.
All right. Well, I will adjourn the meeting until, what was that, June? What's our next meeting?
June
June
20th.
20th.